We know that artists usually have a heart connection when writing a song. They mostly speak from their hearts and frequently discuss how they feel. The Beatles have always done the same thing. Today, we'll talk about the song's inspiration, I Want to Hold Your Hand, which expresses the singer's desire to be in a romantic relationship with a woman he's been falling in love with. He employs enticing lines in the song to entice this lady to embrace him as her lover. But before we get into the video, make sure you hit the subscribe button and give the video a big thumbs up. How much the music was beloved by Americans? American audience already had rock and roll bands. It's demanding to stand out in a sea of talent. You can't just march up to Lady Liberty and demand fame. You must persuade her that not only does your music need to be heard, but that the American people deserve to hear it as well. But what if you had a band that had been touring Europe for years? You could march up to the door and knock on it with pure, loud, and forceful rock and roll, but the door needs to be opened by someone on the other side. And it all begins with Marsha Albert. Believe me, important things are happening over the water, and the Beatles are selling more albums than you can shake a stick at in the United Kingdom, but they weren't significant sellers in the US until several of us endorsed them. So you want to know what happened? Of course you do. Everything begins in Maryland. Albert, a 15-year-old mush, witnesses a CBS broadcast on this bizarre Liverpool band wrecking all kinds of mayhem throughout Europe. She Loves You is shown in the portion of the clip, and Marsha immediately falls in love with the music. She directly writes a letter to a small radio station in Washington, D.C., pleading with DJ Carol James to begin playing Beatles songs on the air. He thinks it's a brilliant concept, and after some significant luck and contracts, he obtains a copy of I Want to Hold Your Hand. The fact that it was not scheduled to be released in America at the time. He plays it, and it quickly spreads across the country. Capitol Records threatened legal action against Airplay in the United States, since they had their own release plans. It was, however, inexorable. As America fell in love with the Beatles, the Capitol decided to screw it and officially release the record, taking advantage of the free exposure, and boom, Billboard ranks the song first. The first Beatles song to do so was I Want to Hold Your Hand, and the lads were overjoyed. In the context of this song, holding one's hand could represent a tight loving tie between two lovers or a marriage proposal, which frequently involves a male having a female's hand while putting the engagement ring on her finger. In any case, the narrator's motivations are evident when he discloses that he is happiest when the lady is with him. He is confident of his feelings for her and how she makes him feel, so he is always ready to grab her hand and go the distance with her. The song's background. Brian Epstein's main concern was Capitol Records' rejection of the group's recordings in the United States, and he persuaded Lennon and McCartney to write a song exclusively for the American market. George Martin, on the other hand, had no such precise memory, assuming that Capitol was forced to let out I Want to Hold Your Hand due to rising demand for the group's goods. McCartney had laterally moved into 57 Wimpole Street in London, where he was staying as a guest of Dr. Richard and Margaret Asher, the parents of McCartney's fiancée, actress Jane Asher. This location momentarily replaced McCartney's Forthland Road home in Liverpool as Lennon and McCartney's new writing base. Margaret Asher taught the oboe in the basement small, rather chilly music room, where Lennon and McCartney sat at the piano and wrote I Want to Hold Your Hand. Lennon told Playboy magazine in September 1980, "We collaborated on a lot of projects one-on-one, eyeball to eyeball. I remember when we got the chord which produced the tune in I Want to Hold Your Hand. We were at Jane Asher's house, downstairs in the cellar, both playing the piano, and we were like, oh, you got that stuff. And then Paul strikes the chord, and I turn to face him and yell, that's it, do that again. I said, we used to write like that all the time, both of us stepping on each other's toes. Eyeball to eyeball is a very appropriate description of it. McCartney said in 1994 of the conditions surrounding the composition of I Want to Hold Your Hand. That's precisely what happened. I Want to Hold Your Hand was written collaboratively. As per Ian MacDonald, in keeping with how Lennon and McCartney collaborated at the time, the two most likely called out lyrically dull, random sentences. If the phrases suited the overall sound, they would stay. The title was most likely a play on I Wanna Be Your Man, which the Beatles had recorded recently at EMI Studios. I Want to Hold Your Hand was collectively on a two-bridge format, with only one intervening verse to connect them, and it is reminiscent of Tin Pan Alley and Brill Building approaches, as well as an example of a modified 32-bar form. The song has no apparent lead singer, as Lennon and McCartney alternate between singing in unison and in harmony. The song is in G major and begins lyrically 2 beats in with "Oh yeah, I'll tell you something," with a D-B-B-D melody note drop and rise over an I-G chord. The iconic chord that Lennon and McCartney hit on the piano while they were writing this song has sparked debate. According to Wolf Marshall, it is the minor VI E minor chord, the third chord in the I V7 VI G D7 E minor. Walter Everett feels the same way. Dominic Pedler, on the other hand, argues that the melody note drop from B to F against the 3-7 B7 chord on Understand is more startling. The Beatles' 1963 song, I Want to Hold Your Hand, was written with two primary objectives in mind, one commercial and the other romantic. But because this is one of the Beatles' most enduring love songs, I'm going to focus more on romance. After the success of Please Please Me, From Me to You, and She Loves You, the Beatles were a well-known name in the United Kingdom, fleeing furious audiences at will, but they had yet to make it through in America. Brian Epstein, the band's manager, was in desperate need of a song, and I Want to Hold Your Hand was the answer to his prayers. The tape was promptly moved to Abbey Road Studio 2, which at the time had a 4-track reel-to-reel. That would have meant that the sound of Ringo's kit, which was made up of at least 5 pieces, would have been captured with 1, possibly 2 overhead mics, leaving the other tracks available to Lennon, McCartney, and Harrison. Given the technological limitations, the clarity of recordings like I Want to Hold Your Hand is truly astounding. Bouncing tracks down, combining multiple channels into one, might have freed up some space, but even that wouldn't have given the Beatles much leeway. Even so, it was more than they were used to, having previously recorded their single on a 2-track. The trio recorded I Want to Hold Your Hand in a phenomenal 17 takes, with the recording process serving as a tool for the Beatles to perfect this song into the finely honed pop gem that it became, securing the band their first US #1. Late in 1963, American news outlets began covering the British sensation, and interest in the group started to grow. Capitol Records took note and issued I Want to Hold Your Hand in the United States on December 26th. The song went to the top of the charts, reaching #1 on February 1964. It sold a lot more copies in the first 10 days of release in the United States than any other British record, and it remains the best-selling Beatles single in the country, selling over 12 million copies. When they discovered they were #1 in America, the Beatles rejoiced wildly. They arrived in America for the first time on February 7, 1964, and were met by screaming fans at the airport. I Want to Hold Your Hand was the #1 song in the country at the time, and it stayed there for 7 weeks before being replaced by their next single, the re-released She Loves You. Conquering the United States was and continues to be a significant accomplishment for British bands. Many bands that are huge in the UK, Oasis, Blur, never truly take off in the United States. The Beatles performed this song on their first 2 appearances on The Ed Sullivan Show on February 9th and 16th, 1964. The Beatles were already the subject of a media frenzy, which was heightened when millions saw them on Ed Sullivan's show. The Beatles were engaged for the concert before they had success in the United States. Thus, they were paid less than many other guests. The Beatles were found by the youth, while young people were readily fooled by publicity and fame. In the case of the Beatles, it was the music that pulled them in. According to Hunter Davies, in his book, Beatles, Sandra Stewart, a 15-year-old American girl, recalled in spring 1964, I was one day in a shop with my mother when I suddenly heard I Want to Hold Your Hand on the car radio. What a unique sound! I couldn't get it out of my head. No other music had such an impact on me. Several other girls at school had reacted similarly. We saw image of the Beatles and thought they were unattractive, but their music was incredible. This is among the best-selling music singles of all time. This featured in Rolling Stone's 2004 list of the world's 500 greatest songs of all time. It was ranked 16th on the highly coveted list. So there you have it, guys, how influential this song was for the Beatles. If you like this video, please smash the like button and don't forget to subscribe to Yellow Submarine. I will see you in the next one.